This is the cinematic language for the small screen. We have done an awful lot of stuff right there and went through it really fast. And I also remember that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about those lighting angles, but we have just whizzed through it. And here we are now talking about this section, a little bit around story beats and characters and story and how you can figure out the return loop. For me, a lot of this stuff gets back to working with performative work and seeing how we can work to make sure that even though you get the technical right, even though the camera is right, there are some hints and tips that we can quickly throw in tonight to talk a little bit about what it is that you do when you finally get onto camera. So when all of those elements are in place and the cinematic language is in place, what do you do when you get onto camera? Well, one of the first things that I want to remind you of is to go, how do you keep track of the beats? Remember to start by working with the actual story beats, those key story beats that you want to hit. And if you wanted to look at one of the previous webinars, I definitely suggest that you look at formats, and I definitely suggest that you look at the one that talks about presenting for the small screen, because we talked about how you almost can storyboard what it is that you're going to do. In shorthand, I'm sitting with it in front of me. There's a storyboard of what it is that I'm doing tonight so that I can keep track of it, just purely because, again, tonight there were a lot of moving parts and you have to keep on top of it and you have to keep track of what it is that you're doing. If you're going to tell stories and you're going to work with story, remember that it's important to work with story that is really about plot and it really is about character. So what is the plot? Well, the plot is what happens. What are these main events that are going to tick out? And on the other end of the scale, what is the character? Who is the character that it's happening to? Do you have heroes? Because the heroes will help you to build empathy. The heroes will help you to build a connection with your audience, and that is all really, really important stuff. So right now, if we get into what it is that you tell story or how you tell story, remember that you can use the difference between stories and anecdotes, because stories are those deeper stories where you really have time to work with a character, where you really have time to develop it well and pull the audience in because there's an important point that you're trying to make. But at the same time, it's working on that connection that you have with the audience. If you work with anecdotes, anecdotal stuff, there are those quick little stories. That's a 2-sentence story that you're just throwing in that demonstrates something particular that you're trying to achieve. On this last section as well, what I can suggest that you remember is to always work with a return loop. So when you get into a frenzy, when you get into that space of the presentation where you're going, I don't know what I'm doing right now and I've got to keep track of it, it is probably because your mind is running away with what your thoughts are and you need to bring it back to listen to what you're saying and to think about the next line that's coming up. And we call that the return loop. So when you work with a return loop, what you really are doing is you're slowing your brain down and you're making part of the process to listen. So it starts out by the brain thinking about what you're doing. From thinking, it goes to speaking. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. So that is slowing me down. From there, I'm also listening to what I'm saying and I'm taking it back into my mind to process. So a very, very interesting process, because while you're doing this, you're going to find that you're listening to yourself, you're immediately going to place words better, you're going to have better emphasis, and that gives you time to think about your posture, it gives you time to think about your space and the gestures that you're using, and suddenly, because you're thinking about all the elements that we talked about tonight, hopefully it's all going to fall in place for you.